We are honored to have a very inspiring group of supporters with us today. And as Ann mentioned, they are a diverse group of panelists, but yet united in their support for our mission. So I would like to start by introducing to my left, Mr. Roberto Rosenkrantz, who is the co-founder and executive chairman of Altos Therapeutics. Donna Zaccaro, who is the president of Dazzling Media, as well as the president of Pharaoh Donna Features, Inc. And on the far end here, Mr. Harlan Stone, the president and chief executive officer of Halstead International. So why don't we jump right in and start with you, Roberto. Maybe you could each share with us your story of how you became involved with the Mmrf.
Okay. So I'm, just by ways of background, I have lots of colleagues here from the pharmaceutical industry. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for 36 years, and 2 big pharmas, 1 biotech company, and then I became an entrepreneur as well. And so I have a very heavy science business background. And I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma about 3.5 years ago. And so my treatments and my relations with my doctors and everybody are very heavy on the science. And I'm a pharmacologist in particular, so particularly on the drugs side of things. My first connection here to Mmrf came through Stanford. I live in California, and I'm near Stanford, and that's where I'm being treated. And a friend of ours, of our families, who's works at Stanford, not connected at all with science, but happens to know Paul and Kathy and a number of people. I think Howard Wolf went to school with you at Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so he knew my story, and he really suggested very strongly that I get in touch with Mmrf, and I did, and I had very wonderful conversations with Kathy and with Ann and many of the staff here. That was about a year, maybe a year and 6 months after I had been diagnosed. That's how I got here. My story, as I said, in part has to do with my relation with my doctor. I think all the patients know that that's a critical relationship, and if you have a very positive one with your physician, it's very rewarding. In my case, I'm not such an easy patient. I have to admit that. Because of the science and the pharmacology background, and because of my personality. And also because I feel very strongly that patients need to be self-advocates as well as agents of change. And clearly the _1 patient agent of change in the world has to be Kathy. And so I think it's fantastic that what has been done here. But as a result of that, I have several stories and things which I'll maybe briefly say one, but I'm very lucky with my doctor because she actually tolerates all my questions of why and why and why this and why not that. And not only that, she's very, very flexible. Dr. Litke, excuse me, on several occasions, I have not liked not been satisfied with the way that the drugs were administered or the doses or something as a pharmacologist. And I basically always tell her that in my book, the difference between a clinician and a pure scientist, which does not have, as a PhD and not all the medical side that you have to deal with, that the clinicians have great responsibility. They have to have all the information. They have to have the knowledge. They have to have everything that is necessary in order to decide what to do. They need to try to cure people. They try to deal with side effects. They try to deal with the progression of the disease, a whole host of things. For me, it's much simpler than that. It's at the pharmacology level in terms of a scientist. I want the data now, And if there's no proof, then I'm the experiment. And I try, and I do that, which makes it hard on the doctors sometimes. But she's very, very good about that. And on occasions, I have changed my treatments. Really all related mostly to dose and frequency. One particular time I really didn't agree with the frequency of dosing. There was no real data that said that this is the way you did it, just data that it worked, but I didn't. So I thought there was possibly a better way of doing it, so I suggested that we should do it in a different way. And we had long discussions, and she has agreed to it. For those of you thinking that I can just, I've changed all kinds of things right and left and it just goes undone, it's not true. She does refuse a lot of things, particularly things that are on this extreme. And every single one of those times, the person that's the happiest is my wife, Heather, because she doesn't particularly like it when I change things that the doctor says. But it works, and it's very important to me to have that flexibility as a patient. I can't run around thinking, well, why isn't it this way? And since there are, again, no clinical trial or whatever that shows something like that, it works like that. So that relationship is critical, and I've been able to have some of those conversations with Daniel and with Kathy and with Ann. And on occasion, everybody's told me that I was probably not on the right track, and so did my doctor, but I still did it my way. And anyway, the point of this is that if it works, then I get a great outcome. If it doesn't work or it works, Dr. Licky has learned something from this. So, and that's good for future patients for other outcomes. I'm going to switch over really quickly back to my background, going back to the Mmrf, and that is, as a basic developer of compounds for many, many years, and I'm talking now of small molecules, I'm not talking genomics, I'm talking the way it used to be done, and it's still done for some things. The numbers are staggering, and most of you have heard them. Kathy mentioned it used to take 10 years or more to develop a drug. And depending on where you look and whether it's a biological or whether it's a small molecule, they're different. But just to give you some of the numbers, in 2015, some people announced that it costs about $2.6 billion to develop a drug. It's more than 10 years. It's 10 out of 10,000 that make it to clinical testing, and approximately 9 to 12% that actually make it to the marketplace. So where I want to go with this is back to Mmrf, and that is that these are prized possessions for pharmaceutical companies, for biotech companies, for anybody developing these compounds. And in the past, and in all my lifetime with all these companies just simply don't share. Why would you want, and I happen to agree with that in this situation, why would you want to share? You have finally have something that might actually make it to the marketplace, and then any little thing becomes a regulatory hurdle. Any little thing could kill the compound. So how can you do it? So it becomes difficult. Now, one of the things that I'm most impressed with, and that's why I was really attracted to this research foundation, was the fact that I was astounded to hear the collaborations that have been done with companies because of what I just mentioned. And all the stakeholders, whether you talk about big pharma, whether you talk about biotech companies, data companies, genomic companies, thought leaders, academic centers. This is a very, very complicated dance, the way that I look at it. And Mmrf has been the one that has choreographed all this dance to make it work. And that was the main attraction for me. I mean, I see the progress, I see everything that's going, but I see that this sharing is tremendous, and there is a really good ability here to move things forward. It's super impressive, unheard of, And having been on the other side, knowing how, I just don't know how you did it. I still don't know how you did it.
Thank you, Roberto. Yeah, and certainly, Roberto, I mean, we talk about the need for patient-driven care. Not only do you embody it, but you take it to a very high degree. So we thank you for that. Thank you. And Donna, your story of how you became connected to the Mmrf.
So I have a completely different background and a completely different connection. My company's, I'm a documentary filmmaker now, running 2 different production companies, one that's for-profit and one that's not for profit, and also went to HBS. But I was originally introduced to both multiple myeloma and the foundation in 1998 when my mother was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And at the time, I was a producer at NBC, and not having heard of the disease, immediately deployed the entire research department to research the disease and what treatments there were and who the experts were and who the best doctors were. And immediately was then introduced to the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and got in touch with Kathy and found the doctors and the team that kept my mother alive for 12.5 years. When she was diagnosed in 1998, there was no treatment other than a stem cell transplant. She was, her multiple myeloma was smoldering or inactive, indolent, for 5 years, fortunately, so that by the time it became active, then her doctor, who was on the forefront and still remains on the forefront of research, was using thalidomide or Thalamid off-label, because I guess it was approved by the FDA for leprosy, and that put her in remission. So that was her first remission. And then when she relapsed, there was another drug, Velcade. And then she was on Revlimid, or maybe it was Revlimid first, then Velcade. Anyway, she was very fortunate to respond to each of the drugs that were then made available. Really lived a lot longer than her original, obviously, than her 3 to 5 year life expectancy when she was diagnosed. At the same time, I became very impressed with what Kathy and the foundation were doing, and did a piece for NBC on Kathy, Karen, and the foundation. I pitched it just as a human interest story, someone who was changing the way that things were done. And the first thing that Kathy had done was very consistent with what she's still doing and what the foundation is still focused on, which is sharing information. And I remember going to the first meeting and hearing that she was going to get together there weren't that many researchers or experts or scientists that were focused on multiple myeloma at the time, but she was bringing them together so that they could discuss what they were doing, which again, as you said, is not something that anybody did. Everybody was rushing to publish their own papers and get their own grants or whatever, find their own treatments. But she started getting people together, and then as I was honored to be asked to serve on the board for a number of years, I was able to watch and support the foundation as it developed other ways of sharing that sort of expertise and collaborating and leapfrogging, first with the consortium, the Multiple Myeloma Research Consortium, and then with the COMPASS study, the tissue bank, then the COMPASS study, and here we are. So let's see, what else did I want to tell you? So I was on the board for 13 years, and my mother passed away, and then I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it seemed like sort of the right time to step down from the board to deal with my own health issues. But the only reason I bring that up is what that diagnosis and then my treatment did was further clarify for me just how different multiple myeloma is as a disease, and how it's been treated and what it needs to move towards. Because with breast cancer, it's so common, and there are experts everywhere. There are very standard protocols, and it doesn't really matter as long as you're going to, you live in a major city, or you're near a major city, or there's so many experts that almost who you go to doesn't matter as much. You're going to get the same protocols and the same treatments, and you just need to work your way through it. Contrast that with multiple myeloma, where who you go to makes a real difference, and what center you go to makes a real difference. And helping you navigate that, you need someplace like the Mmrf, or that's how we used it in our family to sort of, check that we were doing the right things, that we were up on the latest treatments. So fast forward to this summer, when my husband, as it turns out, was diagnosed with multiple myeloma.
No.
I know. So who thought that lightning could strike twice? But it did, and it wasn't even, you would have thought it would have been me, because perhaps there'd be some genetic component to it that would lead, I would be more likely than my husband, who's not a blood relative of my mother. But, the silver lining was I knew exactly what he needed to do, what we needed to do, and my first phone call was to the Mmrf to say, I've been off the board for 3 years. Are the leading places still the same? What are the latest treatments? And just, so within weeks, we knew we had assembled a team that is going to enable him to live with this disease for a long time and get the best treatment possible. But one thing that's also really different now is he's on 3 different drugs that didn't exist, well, even when my mother died. So, well, actually one of them did, Revlimid did. And it's combination therapies, which, the Mmrf funded clinical trials into combination therapies, and obviously you all know that that's where the treatment has been moved, but, we're discussing immunotherapies and everything else with the doctors. And when you mentioned that you questioned what was going on, I know that when my husband was told that one of his, he needed to have infusions twice a week in his course of treatment, and I said to the doctors, does it really need to be twice? Could he just do it in one session? Because I had watched Kathy, who had no patience for going twice a week and wanted to double up on her infusions. But, just having the information and even knowing to ask the question as to whether this was the right way to do things was really helpful, and was because of my exposure.
Thank you, Donna. And not only have you really been there and seen the evolution of the foundation, but in the process, the evolution, as you mentioned, of the treatment of this disease. But going beyond that, we really thank you because you have taken a direct role in raising awareness and always be an advocate on behalf of the patient, whether it's making a documentary, coming here today, constantly raising awareness. We really thank you for that.
Well, it's been my honor.
Harlan?
I'm Harlan Stone, and I think I've known Kathy the longest of any of the 3, and other than her husband, maybe, than anybody, and her mom, of course, in the room. My mother was diagnosed nearly 25 years ago with multiple myeloma, and at that time, there were no treatments, and we were in the complete dark ages. There was no information on the internet, there was no Google, there was nothing. And her treatment was just prednisone, and she had a very short battle with the cancer to which she succumbed to. When Kathy started the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, it was after we had already lost my mom. And I met her at that time, and we got to be friends, and I had an early relationship with the organization, and then it kind of faded away as my focus was on other things. About 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with an even more rare form of cancer. I won't trouble you with the name. It's 44 in 10 million people in the world get this cancer. So I also was in the dark ages. There was no medical treatment. There was very, very few doctors in the world that knew how to treat it. Luckily, I was able to get to the best doctor in the world who resected it and removed the tumor, and I am a very healthy guy today. So I've seen what the darkness can do, and it is such a pleasure for me to be in the light. And I believe that what Kathy and Paul and this organization are doing is they are putting the light on this fear and the scariness of cancer. And this light needs to be shined brightly, not only on multiple myeloma, but using the model of research and shared information across all cancers. So I am, at Kathy's encouragement, sitting in a restaurant in New Canaan. She encouraged me to have my tumor sequenced, and no one had ever sequenced this cancer before. So I became patient number one, and I'm supporting some beginning researches of this obscure disease. But in these diseases, there is a chance to share. So if we, people in this room and the people who care about cancer, are willing and able to break down the walls and the barriers, the infinite benefit, the light can really shine on everyone. And I hope that I have the chance to continue to help light that fire.
Thank you, Harlan. And it was really rewarding to see that half of the room said that data and data sharing was what was most important to them. Harlan, we consider our ambassador of the data bank. When he supports our mission, not only because of the model, because you believe in the power even beyond myeloma, but his support goes directly to the data bank every single year. So again, thank you for being our ambassador of all things data. Mm-hmm. So John D. Rockefeller, who many consider to be the grandfather of modern philanthropy, once said that, think of giving not only as a duty, but as a privilege. And to put things in perspective, in 2015, giving to charitable organizations was $373 billion, which is actually 2% of the US GDP. Now, more people give in this country than vote. So it's clearly a democratic process. There's lots of organizations to choose from, right? So it can be difficult oftentimes to decide where to be philanthropic, what types of organizations to support. So maybe we can start with you, Donna, and if you could share with the group some insight on, your strategy for choosing organizations to support, and how do you measure success in those organizations?
Well, I guess I've been on the board of a bunch of nonprofits over the years, and all of whom I think are doing good work. In fact, I'm going to run out of here to annual luncheon for one of them, so I apologize for leaving. But of all the organizations that I've had any contact with, I really have never seen one run the way that this one has, with the sort of results that it's had. It's run like a Fortune 500 company. It's run like a business, and I think that was the original genius and the continuing genius, because it's not really run like a charitable organization, I don't think, or a nonprofit, because it combines all the expertise of pharma and business with the philanthropic side of it too. And you've seen the number of drugs. I mean, Roberto talked about how long it takes and how much it costs to get drugs through the whole process, and now there are 10 drugs, and it's changed the prognosis from 3 to 5 years to 9 to 10 years. That's huge. I mean, so if you're looking for things like metrics, which I think most people who are investors or who are in business are looking for metrics, it's awfully hard to find them in a lot of foundations, and this one has them and is focused on that. I think in large part because it was started by such a sense of urgency. There was nothing out there. There were no treatments. There was no research. Kathy wanted to see her baby make it to kindergarten. She just graduated from college. I mean, what's better than that? I want my husband to play with his grandchildren. Our kids are both in college, and they don't even have boyfriends and girlfriends yet. But, so there's urgency, and you want to see results.
Absolutely. Harlan?
Well, what draws me to multiple myeloma is two things. Number one is its willingness to be disruptive. So it's too easy to play the game the way it's been played, particularly in cancer research. And it is time for there to be a disruption so that we can accelerate and break down the barriers. And the other is really the embracing of the newest technology. And I don't mean that in the pharma world or even in holding the data. I actually believe that collecting big data to make analytics, predictive analytics, don't study what used to happen, let's anticipate what could happen so we can become ahead of the curve. And I think this is the most exciting part of human enterprise. I think this is the most exciting part of medical research. And I am so thrilled and excited to be able to support it directly. And I wish all charities were embracing this futuristic thinking. This is mankind's hope.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of complement to what you both said, right? Speed, efficiency, we have no time to waste. So anticipating the future via innovative technology and modeling and predicting how the disease will behave, I think they really go hand in hand. Roberto?
So when I think about donations, and I think in terms of science in particular, because of my bias, I mean, I'm thinking about a whole continuum that goes from the discovery of anything, whether it's a drug or whether it's a piece of data that leads to a discovery, all the way to the end, the last bits, that reach the patient. And so as I think of that, I like to go really in two ways. And Mmrf happens to go all the way through from the beginning all the way to the end. So that's one of the unique and great things about it. And talking to what you said, it doesn't have to be drugs. It can be all the data and so forth. So that's important, and I think there's a lot of bang for the buck there. And I think it's also that you get results very, very quickly because you are at the later stages, but you're also at the early stages, because the early stages of discovery is where all most of the big breakthroughs start to happen that can eventually get there. So this is a great location. In addition to that, I've done two other things. We've established a prize called the Rosencrantz Prize for my father that turned, it was his birthday present when he turned 90. He turned 100 about two weeks ago. He's in great health, and he's never had any kind of a chronic disease in his entire life. He's in good shape. So what we did at Stanford, we found out that a staggering statistic that if you take the young PhDs that are coming up and they're just getting their degree, they have to reach about an age of 42 years old before they can get an NIH grant, because all the big shots are already getting all the money. And so we said, we need to fund some kind of discovery research so that would go only to these people. So they've got to get started somewhere, and they're the future. So we started a small Rosencrantz Prize and funded a couple of researchers, and there's a prize every year that they get some funding for and it's really much more broader. It's really healthcare, and it can, somebody that's working on agriculture that's going to feed that's healthcare. And it's run by Stanford professors. We're not involved. We purposely decided we didn't want to be in there trying to make decisions. So it's a group of their peers and the higher professors that do it. So that's the second. And the third is I am on the board of a very small, tiny compared to this, foundation that we, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we basically just give out some money for a number of things, all in healthcare, but it goes anything from hospice to food banks and things like that. And we do fund some research at UCSF and some at Stanford. And it's very local. It's only that area. But I was able to convince them that Mmrf was connected to UCSF, and so I convinced them that they should make a donation to this organization. So the idea of trying to get another foundation to give money to this foundation was what I did, and I was fortunately successful to do a little bit of that.
Well, thank you, Roberto, and it's really an honor to hear that we check the boxes for your cause, because you certainly check the boxes for us, someone who is a driven, engaged patient, knowledge of the biotech and pharmaceutical world, and is willing to be an ambassador and go find others who support our mission. It's really rewarding, so thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And it's a great segue to our next question. So a recent study by Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that the number of scientists in the U.S. has increased more than ninefold since 1965. And the NIH budget has increased fourfold to about $30 billion last year in 2015. However, the number of new drugs approved by the FDA has only doubled, and life expectancy has stayed relatively constant, gaining only about 2 months per year in the past half century. Now, in comparison, as we heard this morning from Kathy, myeloma has seen 10 times as many treatments as we had just over a decade ago, and the tripling of life expectancy. So looking at those two factors and realizing that government alone is not going to deliver the speed and urgency that we really demand on behalf of patients, what do you all feel is the role and responsibility of patients, donors, insurance, research foundations to really rapidly drive healthcare forward? And I know we started talking about this a little bit last night, and I said, please wait, because I want the group to hear this. So I want to leave plenty of time for a discussion here. But to start with you, Harlan, what is the role of these diverse groups to really drive medical research and progress forward?
So I have a very strong feeling that when organizations get large, they become inefficient and they become self-serving. And the government is such an organization. They can't help it. They employ a significant number of people in the country, and they are bureaucratic by design, by definition. So how does the consumer of healthcare affect the marketplace of healthcare? This is, I think, something we don't do enough of. Roberto gave us an unbelievable example of how he did it. And I think we have to influence not only the research community or the foundation, the things that Mmrf supports, but we need to, as consumers, question our insurance companies, question our alma maters. I think everybody in here went to probably a research-oriented university. Why are they holding the walls up? Why do they have to maintain the publish or perish model? It's no longer appropriate. We need to be embracing that innovative spirit that comes strongly from the area where you live, Roberto, and see what it is that it takes to innovate. So we live in a great country, and it's a country driven by the marketplace. We are the market. The patients, the families of patients, the potential patients, we are the market. And when your insurance company or your doctor or your healthcare system does not do what you want it to do, you have to question it. You have to tell them that that's not acceptable, and you have to try to create change. This is our job. This is our responsibility, and we have to not accept that large organizations will do the work. They won't. And luckily, this organization is staying robust, nimble, and disruptive. It's the personality of Paul and Kathy. So let's embrace that.
The only thing I would add to that, and I totally agree, but knowing personally, I'm not, I'm not a scientific expert, I'm not a researcher, and even if you do things like, well, in 2001, Kathy and my mother testified before Congress to try and increase funding going into cancer research and specifically into multiple myeloma research. But we couldn't wait, and the foundation couldn't wait for the NIH or the government to provide funding, which is why they've raised so much more than the government spent in the same period of time. or allocated to the research. But the only thing I would say is what particularly attracts me to the foundation too is that they're almost my portfolio manager. They allow me to diversify my portfolio, and as you would with any investment. I mean, one of the first things, besides getting everybody together, the next thing when there was the consortium was that the foundation invested in novel therapies that pharma wasn't interested in yet, or might never have been interested in, but somebody needed to invest in to see what would work. Well, so I can't individually maybe fund any of those research grants, but the foundation can do a whole bunch of them and then has experts who will monitor what's working and what's not working and then continue funding it to the point where pharma is interested in it. And that's, I think, how they disrupted the whole model and got so many treatments that weren't there. So I sort of see the foundation as my investment manager.
Another point, just on the Polish or parish, which I hadn't thought of a connection, but my father came to Mexico and started the Syntex Corporation, and his first model was to let the people publish, which was unheard of in the pharmaceutical industry because now you're giving away all your secrets. And he was able to attract an enormous number of people to come to what seemed like a far place, and where reactions, when they needed UV light, they took the whole thing out and let the sunshine hit the beakers and everything. But this simple fact of letting everybody do that, and the fact that everybody was allowed to have 20% of their time allowed to do whatever research they wanted. So now you're talking about the other institutions like universities, et cetera. If a pharmaceutical industry that's based on patents and trying to make money back so that they can reinvest it in innovation, as we were talking about last night, can do it, certainly universities should be able to find a way to let people publish at earlier times and be able to share the things in a better way.
Absolutely. And keep some of their intellectual property.
And keep the intellectual property at the same time.
And I love this idea of a portfolio manager. I was actually laughing with some folks in the room that we're sharing this meeting space with Goldman Sachs. And I was walking by and thinking, look, they're managing financial portfolios, but we, as you mentioned, always a diversified portfolio, whether it's novel treatments, immune therapies, molecular targeted precision medicines. We want to keep a robust portfolio because we don't know where the cures will come from. And in the meantime, we want to stay diversified. And I also want to comment too, Roberto, on your acknowledgement of this end-to-end system, right? And as a way that we can drive progress rapidly, because I think it is unique to the foundation. And there's many in this room, I even spoke with in the last 24 hours, but they say, hey, a doctor, researcher, how did you get involved with the Mmrf? Well, I received a grant as a fellow that drew me into the industry, exactly Kathy's initial idea, and I stayed with myeloma because I became intrigued and I knew there was organizations that would support the work. So it's very important points that have a lot of synergy together. So I thank you both for that. And just a follow-up question to you, Roberto. I mean, you really have a unique perspective as coming from the industry and as a patient. Has the role or the power of the patient now changed, let's say from 5 years ago, of ways to actually influence the companies or insurance, as Harlan mentioned?
Yes, I think it's vastly changed, and I think that there's more and more power. And we already heard this morning in the previous panel and in Kathy's presentation and Anne, the patient is, at the end of the day, that's where the rubber hits the road. And the patients have to be much more forthcoming in finding out where to give this information. Okay, we've talked a lot about that the data has to come, the patients have to give it. We know it should be here, but it can't, a lot of places, okay, so they do the testing, like we saw this morning, a lot of people were not tested or don't know. And if they were tested, where did all that data come? Had I known at the time when I was, diagnosed and when they did my testing, then, I would have I have my results, but maybe I would have been in the COMPASS trial had I known. I mean, so I think that's crucial. The other thing, I'm just going to share something in terms of my own views. And there was the article about you and your family, about the genetic testing and different viewpoints as to what to do. Of course, this whole thing, when I got diagnosed, just caught me by surprise. I'd never taken any pills in my entire life. I had a physical 2 weeks before, and everything was fine. So it was really a shock, and any patient knows that you go through an adjustment period, and then hopefully it's okay. So, before that adjustment period, very quickly, I was faced with all the papers for the bone biopsy, and do you want to know? Do you want to send it? Do you want to do it? Do you want to do all these things? And I'm going, well, can I tell you Monday? I got to think about this thing and all of the ethics and all of that. And I think that is an area, it would have been a very simple answer today for me. I mean, that wouldn't, just give me, let me just sign. But I think that is an area which may be an important area to counsel people ahead of going in there. I mean, this was done after, the aspirate was already out, everything was ready. Oh, here's the thing. I mean, I had to consent to have the biopsy, but the other part came after. And so, patients have to try to understand, and it's a very confusing time. And you say, well, do I really want to know? I mean, maybe I just shouldn't know. Maybe I'm better off just not knowing anything. So to your question, I think that's, for some patients that may be the thing. It's not for me. I signed all the papers quickly. But I think that's important. I think it is the responsibility, like I said, that patients have to be the agents of change. And they have to be able to donate. And it's all about data, as we heard all morning. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about data this afternoon. So there's no data without the patients.
Thank you, Roberto. And we actually have a few questions about really what can patients do. You mentioned they can donate, they can give data. To go back to you for a moment, Donna, you've been on this journey as a family member with your mom, and now again with your husband. Is there anything that you maybe learned specifically throughout the journey that you told your husband that was different than how you first approached it with your mom that you would tell to a patient today?
Well, of course, a parent-child relationship is different from a spousal relationship, and I'm sure my husband would say that I tell him and direct him a little bit too much in life in general. It was very different because the first thing that was done was genomic testing, and that really informed, what it narrowed down what the options were, what the best options were. Beyond that, way back when, it was just a shot in the dark as to what was going to work, and you hoped that it was the latest, the most up-to-date effort, but it was really hit or miss. And now it's just so much more scientific. The only thing I would add to what Roberta said about the patient providing information is that the doctors also need to know and be educated that it's really important to share, but also that they need to ask the patient to share. Because that isn't, when my husband was diagnosed and we did go to leading people, I know that I was the one that said, do you need to take it, not to subject him to anything more, but another aspirate so before he receives any treatment, so you can put it in the COMPASS, So maybe doctors don't want to overwhelm patients with any more than they have to when they're first diagnosed and when they're discussing what the options are, but obviously there needs to be a push towards doctors encouraging and requesting that the patients share their data.
We only have a few more minutes, and I have a question from the audience that's directed towards you, Harlan, and would love to get other thoughts afterwards. But the question is, it's clear, the case is clear of why myeloma patients should be involved, and you've all articulated this phenomenally just today. But how would someone who supports our mission, who wants to gain supporters outside of myeloma, how would they talk about the Mmrf? How would they convey the importance of supporting a model like this?
Well, I'm no longer involved in multiple myeloma. I'm the only person up here not involved in it from a family or patient point of view. And my passion for the mission has only increased because I understand that we have a chance to cure cancer. There's no finer words you can say in the English language than we can cure cancer. So if you support the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, then you are helping to lead towards the greatest leap forward that we will ever have in our lifetimes and maybe our children's lifetimes. I have a lot of cancer in my family, and some people die, and I would hope that when it comes to the next generation, that is a very rare event, and I think Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation is a shining star to support it. You don't need to be involved in the disease specifically, and we need to be understanding that when you get down to the deep genetic level, there is a commonality. The mutations that we can watch today allow us to treat all cancers with the information, and multiple myeloma is out in the front of the race. So you better bet on this horse.
Well said, sir. And Roberto, Donna, any thoughts on the applicability of the model outside of just myeloma?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we can do better than what Harlan just put a very nice tagline on the whole thing, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think from my point of view, that end-to-end part that I was talking about creates a model, and I think that it's not only a science model, it's a business model, and I don't mean business in terms of making money, but in terms of raising money. And I think that that's critical. I mean, the numbers are staggering that the Mmrf can bring in, and it's because of Kathy and Paul and the whole team that you have, which is spectacular. And it's because of the results, and it's because of the whole new disruptive approach. So, you know, it has to be the right thing for other cancers. Even, you know, there may be solid tumors, which are different, but it doesn't really matter. It is the right approach. There's no doubt about that.
Amazing.
And that's evidenced by the fact that Kathy and Anne are being asked all the time to participate and talk to other companies and other research organizations and bring how they've, you know, their business model. Really, it's more run like a business than anything else, and to achieve the sorts of results. So it is replicable in other organizations and should be.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank our panel for an as-built, very inspiring session. So thank you all very much.
All right, again, thank you so much, Donna. I know you have to run, so I'll say goodbye from the podium, but you were amazing. Thank you for sharing your stories, your advice. You're good?
Yes, I'm good.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So before we go to the next panel, there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention to all of you. Certainly, you know, you heard the importance of participation, and what, you know, one thing that Kathy often says around the organization is, you know, we're all, you know, every patient is an N of 1, and we need to get to an N of 100,000 myeloma patients. We need to get to an N of 13.8 million cancer patients. So, you know, if you think about it that way, you're helping yourself, but you're also contributing to this much bigger data ecosystem. And it's important, but what we don't have, and what Donna articulated so well, that other cancers like breast cancer have, are very clear standards, you know, in terms of the treatments, you know, and the journey is much more clear than it is in multiple myeloma. And one thing that we do a lot one-on-one is help a lot of patients navigate through, get to the right center, get to the right doctor, get to the right treatment, get to the right clinical trial. And our commitment over the next several months, 12 to 18 months, is really to democratize that journey and make it very clear to all myeloma patients, but potentially partnering with other organizations to all cancer patients, to make it very clear at the beginning when you're diagnosed. You heard it from Roberto Bobby that, you know, you have a lot of decisions, and you do need to make decisions quickly, but they're important because they really can set the stage for the rest of your journey. And we want to make sure that everyone has access to that. So that's, again, something that will be coming. So we're transitioning back now to research. You heard all about the generation of high quality data and why that's important to understanding and treating every patient. Well, of course, we're just as focused on open access to data and making sure researchers everywhere have access to it. Harlan mentioned the importance of not just looking backwards with data, but be able to anticipate what's to come. And you'll hear some of that on the panel now. We're modeling the COMPASS data so that we can start to make predictions, not just look backward. When we started the genomics initiative that Jonathan mentioned earlier, we put all of that data into the public domain. It took a year, as Kathy remembered, literally a year to negotiate a contract with the Broad Institute to be able to do that. That was 12, 13 years ago. So of course we did it with COMPASS. Thankfully it was a lot easier because the companies and the institutions were much more willing. The field had evolved and they were willing to participate in the process. So where we're moving now is to make sure, again, we're forming the partnerships to make sure that the data are analyzed. We have GNFs coming up, but we're also looking at new partnerships. Kathy mentioned them earlier. IBM, Watson, Google. How do we get researchers all over the world, incentivize them with X prizes and challenge grants to analyze the data and come up with hypotheses for clinical trials?